I actually identified 9 common denominators, and they fall in essentially 4 categories. They move naturally. They have sacred daily rituals to reverse the stress of everyday living. A stress triggers something called inflammation, and if you're always stressed, it becomes chronic inflammation, which is at the root of every major age-related disease: heart disease, cancer, diabetes, even dementia. So the Okinawans have ancestor veneration. It take a few moments to remember where they came from. The Icarians and the Icaria is another one of the blue zones, and the Costa Ricans, Nicoya, they're taking a nap. The Adventists are praying. They begin each meal with a prayer. They wake up, and the Sardinians just do happy hour. But either way, there's a daily time where you just slow down and you let the stress reverse course a little bit. They also, and I'd argue this is the most important aspect, they connect. And not necessarily intentionally. They live in communities where they're nudged together in social spaces. So the option to be imploded into your house on your device doesn't really exist. If you're not showing up to church or the village festival, somebody's pounding at your door. They tend to put family first. And interestingly, in almost all blue zones, when you see people making it to 100, they have a very concentrated, solid, committed social circle of 3 to 5 friends. In some places like Okinawa, it's culturally determined. They're called moais, M-O-A-I, moais.
Do they make these commitments early in their lives, the moai?
So when you're 5 years old or so, your parents bring you down to the village. You meet 4 or 5 other people. The ceremony ensues, and you're supposed to travel through life together. When things go well, good crop or a raise, you're supposed to share it, and likewise.
Oh, wow.
When things go poorly. We hear a lot about these social determinants of health, and it's come about 15 years after I wrote the book, but they're so important. Loneliness. If you don't have at least 3 friends you can call on a bad day, it shaves about 8 years off your life expectancy, as bad as a smoking habit. So these things that we've kind of overlooked because they seem too subtle to make a difference really come to the forefront when you're studying populations of longevity.
So you're talking about almost the opposite of 5,000 friends on Facebook. Talking about 3 real friends that you can call or that have that ability to sustain you emotionally.
That's right. In fact, we have, with National Geographic, we created a happiness quiz called the True Happiness Test, where it takes about 5 minutes. But we ask the question about life satisfaction and then how much time people are spending on social media. And you see this very clear curve. People who aren't on social media at all aren't optimally happy. Up to about 45 minutes seems to be the sweet spot.
And
after a day, suggesting that they're using it just for maybe a little intellectual repose or to connect with some friends so they can later meet in real life. But it's very clear, after 2 hours of social media use, happiness drops off a cliff. And the least happy people are on there 8 hours a day.
So let's talk a little bit about how you're taking all of this knowledge that you've learned through these explorations, through these Blue Zone books. You're now applying it to different American cities that are willing and interested in trying to sort of almost hack their outcomes. So let's talk, how did that happen?
I'm going to tell you something now that took me 8 years to figure it out. In populations where people live a long time, it's never because they tried. They never pursued any of the crap that we try. They're not on diets and exercise programs, supplements. Longevity ensued. These 100-year-olds have no more idea how they got to be 100 than a tall man knows how he got to be tall. So they are simply products of their environments. They live in places where the healthy choice is not only easier or unavoidable. So this idea that longevity ensues became the organizing principle. In 2009, I got some funding from AARP and the University of Minnesota School of Public Health to go about trying to manufacture an American Blue Zone. And the idea here was not to try to convince a whole city of individuals to change their behavior. You'll fail. It's never happened in the history of the world where you get a whole population to get on the same diet or exercise program. But we work on optimizing city policy. We certify restaurants, grocery stores, workplaces, and schools. And we get a critical mass of individuals to agree to optimize their home and social network. But in every case, it's permanent or semi-permanent changes to the life environment so people are mindlessly nudged into better behaviors all day long. And it works fabulously.
So give me some examples. So let's kind of go through that list here. One was how do you change businesses, communities, but let's focus on the workplace. Everybody spends 8 or 10 hours a day. It's an enormous part of how they perceive the happiness in their life. So how do you certify a business that is going to contribute to someone's either increased longevity or happiness?
So to begin with, you think about how they get to work. We know that somebody who takes public transportation or walks has about 11% lower chance of dying of a heart disease than somebody who drives their car every day. So in a Blue Zone certified workplace, maybe you pay for your own parking, but you get subsidized if you take a bus. And in some Blue Zones workplaces, they actually pay their employees to walk or take a bike, $5 a day, which is better than going to the gym, as we talked about. The food environments, when you're eating at work, are there some plant-based options, or is everything pizzas and burgers? So we help them change the defaults. And then a very important thing, the biggest determinant of whether or not an employee is happy at work is whether or not how much you pay them, not how much you promote him or her, but whether or not he or she has a best friend at work. So we have these techniques of putting employees together, organize them around their interests and their values, and then challenge them to walk and eat plant-based together. It works fantastically well. So if an employer does that, we give them Blue Zone certification. Important thing to realize, though, is you can't rely on just one micro environment. You have to think of orchestrating the perfect storm of policies, places, and people for at least 5 to 10 years and changing that whole life radius, that whole city comprehensively with enough intensity before you start to see a difference.
Right. So say, for example, in that company, if you are encouraging people to take public transit, there's got to be public transit options in that city right there. Or if you're encouraging them to bike to work, hopefully there are bike lanes in that city. So how do you change all of those policies or encourage all those policies?
So working with cities, and we're now working with 50 cities, including Fort Worth, Texas, and Orlando, Florida, and Austin, Texas. We come to the city council and the mayor with policy bundles. They're essentially